Good evening, everyone. I was waiting for the first speaker until I realized that it was me. So sorry about those few minutes of waiting for me. Good evening, everyone. Bienvenue. Welcome. Welcome here to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. My name is Aisha Khan. I'm the CEO here at the museum, and it is a real pleasure to be here with all of you. A full room, folks online, I understand, joining us today, and a real honor to have our speakers here with us this evening and to gather in this place. So I'd like to just take a minute and maybe we all just take a breath. We're here, we're seated, we're warm, maybe even a little cold, but we're together, shoulder to shoulder, sitting in these chairs in this room in Buehler Hall. This museum is on very sacred land. These are the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Ininiwak, the Anishinaabe, the Dakota Oyate, and the Dene-Sulene. This is the homeland of the Red River Métis. This is a place that has been a gathering place for time immemorial. And so every time, and many of you I've seen before at gatherings in this museum, you know that it shouldn't be lost on you that when we gather in this place, we are doing what was intended to be done in this museum, which is to gather in moments of reflection, for dialogue, to build understanding, to prompt inspiration of the actions that we will take so that we can be better humans to one another. Talking about this evening, I know the program will be about combating anti-Semitism, and I think now more than ever, there's a need for us to listen, to reflect, to think about why we are being the way that we are as humans to one another. I think that at the museum, my team and I have been thinking a lot about what it means to do the work of human rights. What does it mean to live up to this mandate of promoting a better understanding of human rights with special reference to Canada, but not exclusive, to look around the world, to promote reflection, and to do that through dialogue? And we do that through the storytelling in our exhibits, through programs like this and others that we hold in the museum. We do that in the one-on-one conversations we have with you and that you have with each other when you're going into this building, when you're going up in the elevator, when you go home this evening tonight. And it feels good that we're doing that because I think now more than ever, it is really, really tough. Like this event, I think about the organizers of the event, think about the speakers who are coming to speak tonight. This isn't easy stuff. It isn't easy when there is pain all around us and there is harm in our communities and we feel that we want to be with people who think the way that we do, who believe in the things we believe in, and it gives us comfort. And there are so many gatherings in this museum that are about that. And there are other gatherings that poke us and prod us to think differently, to open up our minds and our hearts to our shared humanity. And I know tonight that we will talk and we will feel the connections, the interconnectedness we have as human beings to each other. It's not lost on me that there's a protest or there are people outside, that there are people inside, and there are people who have real hurt and have feelings and thoughts and long histories. And so I think, when I think of the lands that we're on, when I think about what I have been opened up to in terms of Indigenous ways of knowing and being and of the interconnectedness of all humans to each other, it gives me a moment to pause and think about that line that connects us all, because I think every human, I know, and all of you know, every human being is born free and equal in dignity and rights. And we must find times for our advocacy. We must learn, we must combat hate and othering and all forms of discrimination. And we must uphold what we in this country have put together as the foundations of the way in which we will treat each other as humans. And so thank you for allowing me to be here and welcome you to this space. I know this will be a I look forward to this program and to hearing from experts on how we can reflect on those feelings, how we can take action in our own lives. I know that we'll have a respectful dialogue this evening. I know we are here for peace and understanding, and that takes work. It takes work to open up our hearts, let alone our ears and our eyes, to listening, to feeling in the moment. But we'll all do that this evening. That's the hard work. That's the work that we promote here at the museum, and it is an honor to have this talk about anti-Semitism at a time where anti-Semitism is on the rise and at unprecedented levels. We need to have these kinds of conversations. So I thank you all for being here. I thank you for opening up your minds and your hearts to listening, to reflecting, and to taking the conversation home with you, to taking it home to your children, to taking it home to your colleagues, to digesting it in whatever way makes sense for you so that we can find a way that we can hold different truths, that we can navigate the complexities of human rights here in Canada and its impacts that come at us from all over the world, because everyone's history connects us somewhere. And that's the difficult part. So as we sit together this evening, shoulder to shoulder, in this room, in the intimacy of this conversation, I know that we will have a conversation that will connect us. And that's what I'm thinking about tonight as I think about the gathering on this land. I wish you a very good program. I hope that any of you who haven't been to the museum, here's my pitch, come back. Beyond the Beat is our big exhibition that's closing just on September 30th, so you still have some chance to get in. And we have a beautiful truth-telling piece on the 4th floor, the Witness Blanket. And so as we think about truths and facts and how we hold different truths and how we feel them and how we live human rights, I know that those are some of the things that will help inspire us to be the good humans that we wish to be and to find our shared humanity. Thank you so much. Merci.
Thank you, Isha. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us at this special event. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Croft. I am the National Vice Chair of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. But tonight I'm here as a proud Winnipegger, a proud Jewish Winnipegger, and it's so wonderful to have all of you here. Let me begin by thanking our co-hosts this evening, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, of course, and the Arthur Morrow Institute for Peace and Justice. I'd also like to thank all of our sponsors. I will not read their names. They've been flashing in front of you for the last while. But an evening like this, of course, is not made possible without their support, so thank you. I also want to acknowledge, without naming everyone, this is an incredible group. We have several different communities represented here tonight, and I just want to let you know that your presence is very, very meaningful to us especially in the Jewish community. And I just want to thank you for all of the support you have shown us during what has been a very challenging year, so thank you. Tonight is an offshoot of an idea that started with the question of who the ideal speaker might be for the annual joint lecture co-hosted by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Morrow Institute. With both institutions dedicated to the advancement of education around human rights, conflict resolution, global citizenship, peace, social justice, it made great sense that Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, Michal Cotler-Wunsh, be the honored guest. And why stop there? The only thing better than one special envoy are two special envoys. So we are very fortunate to have Deborah Lyons with us tonight, Canada's Special Envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. Michal and Deborah will further be joined during our panel discussion by Gustavo Zentner, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs Vice President for Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and Gustavo will be able to update us on the goings-on here in Winnipeg and Manitoba. I'm going to introduce our guests more fully shortly. My job here is to sort of keep the trains running on time. I will be moderating the discussion, but I did want to make a few introductory remarks. We are now approaching the one-year anniversary of the barbaric attack by Hamas terrorists within the State of Israel. Since that horrific day, groups all over the world have sought to malign Israel and Israeli universities and institutions and demonize Zionists and Zionism, which I remind you is nothing more than the belief that Jews have a right to a homeland and self-determination. Jews across the world are struggling, including here in Manitoba. For millennia, Jews have been forced out of their home countries. In 1939, before the Holocaust, the world's Jewish population was 16.6 million. Recent estimates have today's Jewish population at just under 16 million. So nearly 100 years after that horrific time, we have yet to get back to our pre-World War II population. Researchers have estimated that were it not for the Holocaust, there would be more than twice as many Jews in the world today. Now, I remind everyone of these figures because the only difference, though it's a critical one, between now and World War II is that today we have a home. Jews have a home. Few other people on this planet feel the attachment to a place, even if it's only 8,500 square miles in size, as Jews feel to Israel. It is in this context that I ask you to consider what our guests have to say tonight, as they shine light on how the constant and never-ending attempts to unjustly and falsely characterize Jews in the hostile and egregious ways we are too often portrayed represents a new face of anti-Semitism and why we must be unrelenting in fighting it. To be clear, criticizing Israel and its government over policy, including the way it's prosecuting this war, is fair game and worthy of debate. That's the strength of democracies. But calling for the destruction of the State of Israel and the elimination of Jews is not, and we will never allow that to happen. That's enough for me. You're not here to listen to me. But here's how the evening's going to play out. In about 60 seconds, a 7-minute video will run. And after the video, I'm going to return to this podium to introduce our guests for the evening. Michal will then deliver her keynote, 15 to 20 minutes, and then I'm going to sit down with Michal, Deborah, and Gustavo, and we're going to have a chat. And that will conclude the evening. So now, please direct your attention to the screens. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Minusha Thavagar. I'm a third-year student at Carleton University studying history and anthropology, and I spent a summer in Jerusalem at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. At the beginning of my journey into wanting to figure out the logistics of going to Israel, I was pretty much unable to find a supervisor for my honors thesis. It felt like no one wanted to touch this topic because it was too rife with controversy. And I was given the impression that there were several departments within the university that had this silent boycott of anything to do with Israeli academics. And I had to go out of my way to try and find an academic, a professor that would take me on as a student. The very first day I walked into the old city and went to the Western Wall, it was the feeling of understanding how much history there was there. It made me feel like I was at home. I did not expect to receive the hostility that I did from both my peers and professors. I had assumed that, as students, as scholars, you are encouraged to go and learn objectively both narratives of the story. And yet the backlash that I received was about the mere association to Israel, the mere association to any Israeli academic institutions, because there was this sense that there was a sort of de facto boycott that was going on across campuses of academic institutions, especially in Israel. So it was certainly disturbing to see that as a non-Jew, I was relegated to the realm of, persona non grata for just going there. The impact of the scholarship was remarkable. I was able to go to Jerusalem and spend time for both my research purposes and for attending the course, which was absolutely invaluable. And I could not have done it without the scholarship. So I'm very grateful for that.
My name is Shira Litvak. I am a former University of Ottawa student, currently enrolled in the Hebrew University Rothberg International School. Unfortunately, I had always experienced anti-Semitism within my university career, all the way from 2021 up until October 7th and beyond. The biggest difference was after October 7th, the energy had shifted on campus where people felt as though they could say things they hadn't said before. We are being pushed out of academic spaces. We are being taunted for our identities. And at the core, we are being asked to pick between our identities and our academic experience. And that's not right. And that's not fair. And nobody else has to go through that. I was on the Students Association board, and I had worked with Hillel as well as Chabad. And because of that, I have reason to believe that I was doxxed and flooded with very serious threats. My vehicle was damaged at one point. I was being filmed on multiple occasions in public spaces. And I was concerned for my safety in a serious, very serious manner. I think where it got to the point that I had to step away was when my anxiety got so bad that I was having near daily panic attacks. I was not able to go onto campus because I was worried about being followed or filmed. I sat down with my parents and my sisters, and I was crying, and I said, I don't know what to do. I need to be in Israel. I need to be with my people, but I also need to go back to school. And then we spoke about different options. Hebrew made the most sense. I love Jerusalem. I love the city. I love the people. I love the land. And so I applied. So I initially connected with Mariah, who is an incredible human being, and I told her the first thing: it is not financially realistic for me to go. And I'll never forget, she looked at me dead in the eyes and she said, finances are going to be the last thing you have to worry about. When I left the university, I began working at a Jewish community center, and I began working in advocacy work. I went to different rallies in Toronto, in Washington, in New York. I spoke at Queen's Park, at different synagogues and more. And I tried really hard to make something out of nothing and to show my peers that we are one. We are one nation, we are one family, and all we can do is get through this together. Thank you so much for the financial support, for the scholarships. The assistance that I'm getting is going to allow me to make an even further difference in this world, and that's all I could ever want. Without this financial assistance, I would not have been able to fulfill my dreams, and I am truly grateful for this life-changing opportunity.
And now I'll provide a more detailed introduction about our guests. Deborah Lyons. Ms. Lyons is a diplomat with 25 years of experience in international relations, political affairs, security management, and development. Deborah served as Deputy Ambassador of Canada to the United States from 2010 to 2013, Ambassador of Canada to Afghanistan from 2013 to 2016, and Ambassador of Canada to Israel from 2016 to 2020. She also held several senior positions at Global Affairs Canada, Natural Resources Canada, the Privy Council Office, and the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. Ms. Lyons recently served as the United Nations Secretary General's Special Representative for Afghanistan and head of the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, championing increased regional cooperation and advocating for measures to stabilize the region's macroeconomic environment, which had been shaken by sanctions. A strong and visible advocate for the rights of all Afghans, Ms. Lyons was recognized by the Community of Democracies with the Mark Palmer Prize during the 2019 UN General Assembly. Gustavo Zentner is known to many of us. He is my colleague at CIJA, and he has been very busy of late in his role as Vice President for Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Gustavo assumed this role earlier this year. He upholds CIJA's mission to preserve and protect the quality of Jewish life in Canada through advocacy as an agent of the Jewish Federations of Canada. Gustavo works closely with leaders in government, academia, and civic society, along with other local, national, and Israeli decision-making networks to address many different areas, most notably challenges associated with anti-Semitism. Prior to taking on his current role, Gustavo, who's always been a tireless worker for our community, served as president of the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg. And our special guest this evening, Michal Cotler-Wunsh, is Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism. Michal is a prominent public speaker, author, researcher, and independent policy and strategy advisor on intersecting issues of anti-Semitism, law, human rights, and Zionism. She was a member of Israel's 23rd Knesset, where she chaired the Addictions Committee and Subcommittee for Israel Diaspora Relations, was a member of the Foreign Affairs and Security, Constitution and Law and Justice Committees. A lot of these titles are really long, aren't they? And co-founded the Interparliamentary Task Force to combat online anti-Semitism. Since assuming the role of Special Envoy, and especially since October 7th, Michal has tirelessly traveled the world representing Israel and the global Jewish community in highlighting the changing face of anti-Semitism. A highly sought-after speaker, Michal has appeared on CNN, the highly acclaimed Sam Harris podcast, and numerous other networks. a trusted and informed volunteer ambassador for our community, we are grateful for her tireless efforts to combat anti-Semitism around the globe. It is now my pleasure to welcome Michal to the podium.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everybody. Wow, what a beautiful space. And Aisha, thank you for starting us off and acknowledging the space in which we sit and the discussion that I hope that we will have in what I cannot imagine a more fitting place that really, as a human rights museum, enables me to delve into the topic of our discussion this evening of anti-Semitism from a perspective that is very important and very close to my heart on many, many levels. I'll share with you, I was appointed to the role of Israel's Special Envoy for combating anti-Semitism 3 weeks before October the 7th. I had the plan, like my colleague Deborah and about 35 other special envoys around the world for combating anti-Semitism, the United States, many European countries, some South American countries, for creating what is a holistic strategy that would be unrolled and enabling, in my case, as Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, an international component of a strategy. And then October 7th happened. For us in Israel, if I may share, the story of October the 7th hasn't fully been told. You see, every one of us has a story of October the 7th, except that we are not yet in the stage where we can begin to tell the story because there is an ongoing war intent to annihilate the state of Israel as we speak. This morning, it began very early for me when my daughter informed me that at 6:30 a.m. in Israel, she was rushing into the safe room because sirens are wailing in Israel as we speak. And that is precisely how October the 7th began. At 6:30 a.m., it was a Sabbath morning, and actually a holiday that is sort of the peak of the Jewish high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and then the end of the Jewish holiday period ends with Simchat Torah, the celebration of the book that kept us, the Jews, a prototypical indigenous people who have spoken the same language, Hebrew, have read the same book, the Tanakh, have traversed the same land, Israel, and have practiced the same customs and rituals for thousands of years, the holiday in which that book was desecrated when at 6:30 in the morning, sirens were wailing across the country and millions of Israelis rushed into their safe rooms, except that that was just cover for the infiltration of more than 7,000 barbaric savages into kibbutzim and moshavim and cities along the Gazan border. And I want to remind us, as we're about to mark 1 year, and as we must bear witness, in order to burn alive and rape and mutilate and massacre and abduct everybody that came across their path. 1,200 human beings, Holocaust survivors, entire families, young children, youngsters dancing at the Nova Peace Festival, and elderly people in their beds were murdered on that day in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. 251, not all Israelis, some students, foreign students that were studying agri-tech down south in those moshavim and kibbutzim, 251 human beings were stolen on that day from the Nova Peace Festival, from their bedrooms, from the places in which they were working and researching. 101 of them remain in captivity. And I want to remind us, from my international law perspective,
Holding of those hostages constitutes a standing violation of international law. A standing violation meaning that every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day, of every week, of every month, of the almost 1 year that has passed since October 7th when they were abducted is another violation of human rights, in which 72-year-old peace activist, Canadian-Israeli Vivian Silver, was not only murdered on that day, and she happens to be from right here in Winnipeg originally, but in fact, her remains took 5 weeks and archaeologists to identify. That is the October 7th of which we speak. Atrocities, war crimes, crimes against humanity, too terrible to imagine. The barbaric attack on civilization, on what I refer to very often as 10/7, would have, or you would have thought, should have been met with nothing but condemnation. Across the board condemnation from religious leaders, from academic leaders, from politicians, from legislators around the world. There is no other option that we can imagine for the barbaric atrocities I've just described, except that. The very same anti-Semitism that fueled the atrocities, the war crimes, the crimes against humanity perpetrated on that day, is the anti-Semitism that fueled the responses to the atrocities, to the war crimes, to the crimes against humanity perpetrated on that day. Responses of silence, me too, unless you're a Jew, in the very institutions, including the United Nations, women's organizations, of complete silence. Responses of denial, and I'll share with you, whereas it took decades for the denial of the Holocaust, including right here in Canada, for Zundel and Keegstra, for all those of us old enough to remember in the 80s, to attempt to teach Holocaust denial. 10/7 was denied even as the 7,000-plus barbaric savages live-streamed the atrocities. Denial set in. Responses of justification. Wouldn't you know it, Judith Butler, who I studied in law school, explaining that rape is armed resistance. And finally, responses that attacked Jews around the world, right here in Canada, in the United States, across Europe, in Australia, attacked Jews in response to the worst attack of Jews since the Holocaust. And so when we meet here today, what I would like to share with you, and that I hope we will discuss further in our panel conversation, is my understanding from a human rights perspective of how we have arrived at this moment. You see, Jews, as I mentioned, a prototypical indigenous people, exiled and persecuted for thousands of years. In fact, colonized and exiled and persecuted for thousands of years, returned to our ancestral homeland 76 years ago with what was the understanding that it is the ancestral homeland to which we are returning after thousands of years of exile and persecution, and that that homeland is committed to equality for all who live there, including all of its minorities. If any of you have visited Israel, and I invite you all to visit, you will witness the diversity of Israel on every street, on every beach, in every mall, in every hospital, in the Supreme Court, in every university. That understanding of 1948, in which Jews, one Jewish country in the world, and there are tens of Muslim-majority countries and tens of Christian-majority countries, there is one Jewish country in the entire world, was for the first time in thousands of years to be the state of the Jews, equal among the family of nations. But after a series of wars from 1948 to 1973 failed in the openly declared intent to destroy and annihilate the state of Israel, I would argue in this place that is dedicated to human rights in this conversation, that in 1975, that's almost 50 years ago, a process that began to demonize and delegitimize and apply double standards to what was intended to be the state of the Jews, but turned into the Jew of the states, with a 1975 UN Zionism is racism resolution, passed in the UN, and by the way, Soviet propaganda that predates 1975 by a lot. 1975 Zionism is racism, UN resolution, alive and well on 2024 university campuses in the name of progress. And I should share with you that I am a Zionist. And I should share with you that if you know Jews in this country, an overwhelming majority, over 90% self-identify as Zionists, because just like Steve shared, actually, Zionism is the progressive national liberation movement that enabled the return of that indigenous people to our ancestral homeland. And all it means for me and for all of us to be a Zionist is that we recognize that for thousands of years our ancestors prayed and yearned and longed to return to Zion. That's it. But if Zionism is racism, that turns me into a racist, doesn't it? Because I just shared with you that I am a Zionist. And so after the Zionism is racism blood libel number 1 resolution passed in the UN turned into this mainstream understanding that we meet at every street corner or social media platform, the 2001 Durban Conference Against Racism, which many of us may remember, turned into an anti-Semitic hate fest, led to the second blood libel that has been spread systematically, and that is that Israel is an apartheid state. Now, I am old enough to remember South African apartheid, and Israel may have its share of problems, as do all other democracies. I'm a single standard girl, and I apply the same standard to Israel, and it must repair the challenges as a democracy that it has. But Israel is not an apartheid state. And so blood libel number 2 was then peddled systematically across campuses, including in this very country, in what is known as Israel Apartheid Weeks. We are now marking about 23 years of Israel Apartheid Weeks that were marked on every single campus across North America, many places in Europe, and around the world. Blood libel number 2 in the demonization and the delegitimization and the double standards that whereas in the past when we were stateless was applied to the individual Jew, barring them from an equal place in society, all that happened is that anti-Semitism didn't die in Auschwitz, it mutated, and it now demonizes and delegitimizes and applies double standards to the Jew among the nations, barring it from an equal place in the family of nations. And finally, the most Orwellian inversion of fact and of law that I think is very important we recognize in this space, and as we delve into the imperative of identifying and combating the tsunami of anti-Semitism that we have seen in response to October the 7th and the war raging since, intent to annihilate the State of Israel. And that is the allegation that was charged by none other than South Africa, Durban Conference Against Racism, South Africa, against the State of Israel in none other than the International Court of Justice. And as we sit here in this museum, we understand the importance of institutions that will uphold, promote, and protect foundational principles, including those of human rights, equally and consistently, alleging that the State of Israel was perpetrating nothing but genocide. And I want to share something. As a legal scholar, and many of you may have that sort of access to information, genocide too, just like racism and just like apartheid, actually has meaning. Genocide was a term coined by Raphael Lemkin, whose entire family was annihilated in Auschwitz. And when he, for the entire life that he lived actually in solitary, really alone, not only to create the term genocide alongside Lauterpacht, who termed the coined crimes against humanity, in order to be able to try the atrocities too terrible to imagine, but not too terrible to have happened, in which 6 million Jews were burned and massacred and murdered in kinds of ways that are too terrible to imagine. That term genocide was coined But not only was that term genocide coined so that you could create a legal structure to try the atrocities, but the Convention for the Prevention and the Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was created. And wouldn't you know it, the nation state of the Jewish people that had suffered the worst genocide known to mankind was one of the first signatories of that convention. And it is precisely that convention that South Africa used in the International Court of Justice, created to be a court of last resort, to allege that the State of Israel is perpetrating genocide, even as it defends itself from openly declared genocidal intent in the Hamas Charter, from openly declared genocidal intent of Hezbollah that joined the war on October the 8th, firing now more than 8,500 rockets at Israelis, from openly declared genocidal intent of the Houthis in Yemen, all proxies of that openly declared genocidal intent of the Islamic Republic of Iran that holds the people of Iran as Hezbollah holds the people of Lebanon, as Hamas holds the people of Gaza, as human shields, as sacrifices, as hostages to what is authoritarian regimes for whom human tragedy is the strategy. And so in this Orwellian inversion of fact and of law, we have come to peddle the blood libel that accuses, once again, the Jew, among the nations in this case, of being the most evil that we can imagine. Racism, apartheid, genocide. There is nothing left to do with a country that we can accuse of the worst crimes against humanity than to dismantle it. And in many ways, perhaps the most devastating is to see that the protests over and over again on campuses, on streets, that we have seen are labeled as pro-Palestinian. You see, for me, as a human rights activist, if you care for the people in Gaza, for the Palestinians in Gaza, you would call to free Gaza from Hamas's genocidal terror rule that has systematically used international humanitarian aid to build a longer tunnel system beneath Gaza, beneath homes, beneath schools, beneath mosques, using children and families as human shields and as human sacrifices. If you are a human rights activist who cares, then you would be calling to free the people of Lebanon now as well from Hezbollah that uses them as human shields, as human sacrifices. If you do care, and you are committed to ensuring that never again to anyone, then you would be protesting the actual genocide perpetrating in Sudan right now as we meet here in this Human Rights Museum in this beautiful space. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what makes this an existential moment. And I want to share with you that it's not just an existential moment for the State of Israel, the nation state to which Jews returned after thousands of years of exile and persecution. And let there be no mistake about it, the State of Israel does not exist because the Holocaust occurred. It's precisely the opposite. A Holocaust could not have occurred had the State of Israel existed. You see, after October the 7th, we understand more than ever the imperative for there to be one Jewish nation state, one in the entire planet. Because if nothing else, 45% of us living there, of our less than 16 million people, 45% of us living in Israel and 45% of us living in North America and about 10% in the rest of the world. But what we know is that for the first time in thousands of years of Jewish history, we can actually make good with what Golda Meir, a former prime minister of the State of Israel, taught us, which is that the world hates a Jew who hits back. The world loves us when we're to be pitied. Well, here's the thing. Israel is the Jew that can hit back. So after thousands of years, it is not for us to actually just be eliminated in whatever capacity the decision is rendered, in whatever authoritarian regimes. So it is not just an existential moment for that nation state of the Jewish people, to which we returned 76 years ago. It isn't. And it's not just an existential moment for Jews around the world who, in the most unfathomable fashion, have discovered in the year-long, not only of October 7th, but in the war that has been raging, openly intent to annihilate the State of Israel, that they are suffering anti-Semitism across places and spaces. We hear from students who are being excluded from their clubs. We hear from students who are opting out of going to campus. We hear from students who are knowingly avoiding certain professors. We hear from students who are actually deciding to leave universities. We hear from faculty members who are afraid to speak up. So Jews around the world have actually experienced a tsunami of anti-Semitism even as this war rages. Certainly an existential moment for us as a people, once again. But that's not it. As we stand here in Canada, in a museum for human rights, with a legacy of those that came before us, it is an existential moment for all of us who believe, who champion, who cherish those human rights. You see, that international rules-based order, written in ash and blood of 6 million who were annihilated in the Holocaust, in order to ensure that never again, that created the international rules-based order and the international institutions and the human rights infrastructure that would uphold, promote, and protect equal and consistent applications of those principles. If you apply them selectively, they no longer exist. If you co-opt the meaning of racism and those that suffer and suffered racism, of apartheid and those that suffered and suffer gender apartheid in Iran, of genocide and those that suffered and suffer genocide, without understanding the imperative to equally and consistently apply those principles, they won't be able to protect anybody. The understanding that the demonization and the delegitimization and the double standards, that is the mechanism that enabled the atrocities of the Holocaust, that enabled the atrocities in Rwanda, that enabled the atrocities in Sudan, because if you demonize and you delegitimize and you apply double standards, then everything is mainstreamed, legitimate, and normalized. It is actually a license to murder, is a demand for us to understand in the context of anti-Semitism that after that 2001 Durban Conference Against Racism, along with Israel Apartheid Weeks, began a very long democratic process to create a comprehensive definition of anti-Semitism that would track precisely what I just described to you, the co-opting and the weaponization of human rights themselves to create a new strain of anti-Semitism, the oldest hatred in the world, as Professor Wistrich called it. The oldest hatred that has survived by mutating, by latching onto the guiding social construct of each time: religion, science, and in our day, the secular religion of human rights. And so what we have is the normalized strain of anti-Semitism that is anti-Zionism, that enables the normalization of a new strain of anti-Semitism in which people say, I don't hate Jews, I just hate Zionists. And by the way, this strain of anti-Semitism is especially pernicious because you need not be a Jew in order to be accused. You need just believe that the State of Israel has a right to exist. You need just self-define as a Zionist or be assumed to be a Zionist. And in this sense, what we have is an existential moment for our shared humanity. Because right here in Canada, were the foundational principles that have guided this incredible country of diversity, of multiculturalism, of human rights for all. If the Jewish communities in this country, if Jewish individuals, businesses, are targets because of their identity, because of the way they are perceived to define or self-define, because I cannot just shed my Zionist pound of flesh to be a good Jew or a good human being. If we enable that, then what we have lost is the foundations of this country, of Canada, that we all cherish, that the world looks to as a beacon of human rights. And with this, I'd like to come to a close, because in this room, I have a great deal of hope. I have a great deal of hope because of the diversity in this room. I have a great deal of hope because of the allies that I have met tonight. I have a great deal of hope because I understand that no subject of any hate can actually fight that hate alone, nor do we expect them to. And I'm a single-standard girl. I have a great deal of hope because I know that there are people in this room that recognize that anti-Semitism is not a problem of Jews. It's a problem of anti-Semites. And it's a problem of all of the spaces and places that allow anti-Semitism to dictate our conduct, our discourse, our spaces, that allow anti-Semitism to spread, to permeate, to infect. That if an ever mutating virus is to be comprehensively addressed, just like we understand in a post-COVID world, it's not enough to inoculate against the old form of a virus, say COVID-19, in this case, I don't know, Holocaust inversion, or the blaming of the individual Jew for controlling the world. We are going to have to identify and combat all the strains of what is an ever-mutating virus, which we can only do with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. And I have a great deal of hope because I know that there are Canadians out there that may be afraid to speak up, but recognize that something is very wrong. That in Canada, in the United States, across Europe, it is the coal mine, if you will, that the bloody canary in the coal mine may be the Jews, but that in the words of the late Elie Wiesel, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And if we are paying attention, and here, though I do have a great deal of hope I want to share with you, that hope, as the late Rabbi Sachs differentiated, is not optimism. Because whereas optimism is the belief that everything will be okay, hope is the belief that together we can make it okay. In that sense, optimism is a very passive virtue, whereas hope is a very active one. And it takes not very much courage to be an optimist, but a great deal of courage to have hope. And I remind us all that the national anthem of the State of Israel, to which my people returned after thousands of years of exile and persecution, that national anthem is the hope, hatikva, the hope that kept the Jewish people for thousands of years and that will continue to keep the Jewish people for thousands of years, with the allyship, with the understanding that to reclaim human rights, including their foundations as they have been appropriated, and to renew our shared covenant to those shared values requires that we remember our story and remind what the Jewish story is. So thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for your friendship, and thank you for listening.
Michal, thank you very much. Can everyone hear? Is the mic working? Yep. Great, thank you. While the others are getting seated, I'll just let you know. So we collected a number of questions over the past few days, and I have sort of worked those, massaged those into categories, and have come up with a number of questions. So we'll try to move through them as quickly as we can. And I'm going to start with you, Deborah. Give Michal a chance to catch her breath. Many of you will know that there's a real connection here, which is that on October 16th, a number of us were in Ottawa for an anti-Semitism conference. And it was there that Deborah formally assumed the position of Envoy, and she assumed that position from none other than Erwin Cotler, Michal's father. And I don't for many of you, I don't have to tell you, I mean, Erwin Cutler is really a champion to many of us, a champion of human rights, happened to be the justice minister. But when I say human rights, I'm not talking about just advocacy for Jews, but for all groups around the world over his entire career. And Deborah assumed that position 9 days after October 7th. So my question for you, Deborah, is I suspect that in the months leading up to that appointment, you had a pretty clear sense of what your role would be. How did that change after October 7th?
Everything changed after October 7th. Everything. Every aspect of the work, the environment, the courage or lack thereof of leadership, the pain in this country. I think the revealing that, not that we're broken, because we're not, but that we were breaking. And by that I mean Canada, not the Jewish community, but the country. I took the job in part because of Erwin, of course, who has always been an advisor for me over the last decade. And he felt I definitely should take it. As an ambassador of Canada, I always had this fabulous experience of being able to talk about how great our country was. Canada the good, the diverse, the inclusive, the compassionate, the kind. And as I was on my way back to Canada after having served abroad for 10 years, I began to see that we were becoming polarized, that hate was starting to creep in, and it worried me because I had lived in countries that had imploded because of that. And so I knew that I would come back and do some work on hate speech. I had no idea that it was going to be this job, nor did I have any idea that it would be this intense. So the work plan that we had in the months before I took the job, in the summer as we were discussing it in the fall, was in fact to combat the systemic issues of anti-Semitism that exist in all parts of our government structures and our society. So we had a clear plan of what we needed to do. But then when October 7th hit, I remember vividly, I know we all do, waking up that morning early and looking at our phones and being consumed. It was like everything went into deep, deep pain and moved onto steroids at the same time, because all the work became that much more important to do and to get done, but in an environment of pain and hate that I had never seen in this country, and with leadership that all sectors of society, not just political leadership, but all sectors of society, where leadership became paralyzed in their ability to respond and to act. So those first few months were extremely difficult, and the only way in which I could embrace them was to basically travel across the country and be with the Jewish community right across the country. I was in Winnipeg here in November, and also to meet with others in our society, the police chiefs, university presidents, media, on, government, provincial, municipal, and try to talk about how we would respond to this tsunami that was facing our country. And I guess what I'd say, Steve, is those first many months were extremely difficult. You could feel the pain, you could feel the paralysis, and some days you wondered if we were going to make our way out of it. I think now, a year later, things have calmed slightly, but now we can, I hope, galvanize the leadership that is required, now that people have come out of the shock and the turmoil, galvanize the leadership that is required to, yes, fight the anti-Semitism in this country, but also to see this as an example of the incredible amount of work we've got to do to be that Canada the good, to be that inclusive and kind society, and to make sure that we are protecting this important democracy that has, I can assure you as an ambassador, been for many other countries an example, a model, And I think we've lost sight of that in this last year, in the pain. So we keep working. We're working with law enforcement, we're working with university presidents, we're working with provincial governments. We met with your mayor today. Winnipeg has been a symbol of multiculturalism for Canada many, many years ago when I was a child, and that will continue. But there is so much work to be done by leadership on all fronts. And I will just close off by saying one of the challenges in all of this, particularly this year, was to see the lack of courage. And I'm reminded of that absolutely wonderful saying that the mark of a civilization is not the courage of its soldiers, it is the courage of its bystanders. So we need our leadership at all levels, and Canadians at all levels, to fix what has been breaking, and I think move out of this crisis, maybe even through a catharsis, to a better place for all Canadians.
Thank you.
That's the only thing we have to do.
Thank you, Deborah. Gustavo, over to you. You've been in your position for about 9 months. I think that's right. And, you know, we talk about the fact, and Michal referred to it, that anti-Semitism isn't only a Jewish problem. I mean, anti-Semitism is an attack against Western values. I know you've been working with a lot of people, in fact, in this room, outside the Jewish community. I wonder if you can share with us the types of discussions you've had and your experiences in that regard when it comes specifically to the question of anti-Semitism.
So thank you. First of all, let me say there's nothing I would rather be doing now than fulfilling this job for the community. And what I mean community is, make no mistake, it's not the Jewish community. It's for the collective, for all of us. One thing that I learned is that I've actually been wrong for a long time. I talked about my community, and today I'm proud to say that I've learned to talk about my people. And my people include the church, the Ukrainian community. My people include those with lived experiences in the indigenous community that, other than all of us, immigrants at one point or another, we're now being granted an opportunity to have a frank dialogue that for some reason, somewhere along the line, we just gave ourselves the license not to have. So for us to actually focus on our community, let's understand that our community are the people that have reached out to us immediately after the attacks, when no one, including most of us in the Jewish world, understood or were able to comprehend the dimensions of the attacks that happened. And there were many attacks, and the atrocities that follow that. Our community means people that in business have reached out to us to say, guys, you're not alone. We know you from where you were an advisor, when you were a client, or when we worked together. We know you from where we were together in government, and now people have moved on to various roles and still reach out proactively to say, don't you dare, leaders in the community, to think or to hint that this is something that you alone need to do. And I'm so pleased that we heard from two world-renowned leaders, Michal and Deborah, here tonight. The one takeaway from tonight would be that this is not something exclusively for members of the Jewish community or the Jewish Federation to do, or any of the other organized entities, but it's a collective responsibility. So in more practical terms, let me just not talk about us for a second, Steve. 2 years ago, I was very lucky to be part of the board of directors of the Federation, and in a horrific day in February of 2022, there was an illegal invasion of Russia into Ukraine. And as most of you should know, in our Jewish faith, saving one life is almost as if you've saved humanity. We also say, Kol Israel Arvim Ze Lazeh. Every person is responsible for one another. We, the community, got organized and not only showed up on a Saturday, our sacred day of the week, to stand with people that were victimized through an invasion. And that was not something focused on Jewish values. It was the deep understanding of indigeneity, what it means, as Michal said, to belong to a land, to have our own culture and our ethos, our heritage, our histories, remembering the smell when Baba or Zayde were cooking. I know that I'm talking about something all of you understand. So we show up, and since then we also did something that we do very well as the organized Jewish community. We rally up, we joined, we advocated for you with governments. We did fundraising, which is something that has been fundamental for the Jewish community and the state of Israel to self-define. And we did it for that community. And every year after that, we continue to show up. And our friends in the Ukrainian community, including the most senior archivist, are here with us tonight. And that's not because we are putting together this event, it's because they understood that we were there for them. And I want to tell members of the Jewish community, don't we dare think that we're alone, because we're not. And that goes beyond the Ukrainian community. The Métis Federation, that has for years clearly articulated the value of sharing best practices with the innovation that goes on in Israel and the opportunities that our people here in Manitoba, in Canada, have by respecting the land, doing joint research. And that's where Canadian Friends of Hebrew University and other universities come to play. Because with our organized community and expertise, we can improve people's lives. And that means people's lives, not just the Jewish community fight on anti-Semitism.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good. Michal, a challenge I think that many people in the Jewish community and non-Jews have as well is finding the right words, expressions to express their support for the state of Israel while disagreeing with policies of the Israeli government. I'm not asking you to share your political views specifically, but rather, what advice can you give us? Again, this applies equally to Jews and non-Jews, as to how we see what's happening on TV. It is painful, the suffering of the Palestinian people. How can we best position this sort of discussion about anti-Semitism, etc., in light of the fact that many of us actually do not agree with Benjamin Netanyahu or the government of Israel?
Well, I want to say very clearly, Israel is a democracy, and like Canada, like the United States, like other democracies around the world, holds elections. A democratically elected government in the state of Israel receives much criticism. You should know probably more than in many other democracies. And criticism of a policy, of a politician, of a certain government, that is not anti-Semitism. In fact, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism stipulates precisely that in, if you will read the definition, just after what's in the neat little box and before the 11 examples of the various strains of anti-Semitism. Criticism of the state of Israel, of certain policies, of politicians, like any other democracy, is not only not anti-Semitism, it's what democracies and how democracies improve, thrive, and so on. What is anti-Semitism is delegitimization, the denial of Israel's very right to exist in any borders. I want to be clear, October 7th was not about 1967 borders or any other borders. October 7th was about Israel's very existence. And delegitimization, the denial of Israel's very right to exist, is anti-Semitism. There is no country in the world whose very right to exist is called into question. Not Iran, not Cuba, not Venezuela, not Canada, not France, no country. And if we are going to take very seriously the notion of equal and consistent application of principles, then there is no acceptable delegitimization that we would say, well, but Israel's different. And that is something that's very critical for me to make accessible across very many publics with whom I engage. Criticism of a government is 100% okay. In fact, it is what we expect in a democracy. I'll say one more thing that you asked about, Steve, because it is tragic. There is no ability to use any other word than tragic for any loss of life. Of course, the fact that there are Palestinians who are suffering greatly, and by the way, people in Lebanon now who are suffering greatly, that does not actually enable us to then move on to the next part of it, in which we excuse the genocidal terror organizations that use them as human shields and as sacrifices, hiding below the civilian infrastructure. You can hold the state of Israel to account for the same standard as you were to any other country. Let's say if Canada were attacked from the United States with 8,500 rockets, or if there was an entire underground infrastructure in the incredible infrastructure that you do actually have in Winnipeg, except that it was used to then store weapons of mass destruction, then you would expect any country, not just because it has the right to, but because it has the obligation to protect its civilians. That's the sort of unspoken covenant between a country and its civilians. And that is where the tragedy is, that those that have held Palestinians hostage as human shields, as human sacrifices, not only are not held to account, but are sort of given a carte blanche to continue doing precisely what they're doing, which is to maximize the fact that for Hamas, but one proxy of Iran, or the Islamic regime of Iran, it should be clear the differentiation between the people of Iran and the Islamic Republic of Iran has to be made clearly. It's exactly the same differentiation as between the Palestinians and Hamas, as between the people of Lebanon and Hezbollah. The understanding that we are enabling those that use human tragedy as their strategy. For Hamas, the more Palestinians are killed, the more they know the pressure will be applied in Israel. It should be exactly the opposite. For them, it's a win-win. Whether they kill Israelis or Palestinians are killed, Hamas is emboldened. And Hamas is a genocidal terror regime. I implore that people understand it's not only a designated terror organization here in Canada. In its charter, it calls for the murder of Jews and the annihilation of Israel, like Mein Kampf. If we would be okay with Nazi Germany actually continuing to carry out the intention of not just wiping out Jews, but in fact in many more generations of controlling the authoritarian and dehumanizing and delegitimizing of any other minorities that we saw during World War II, then we can be okay with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with the Houthis, as I mentioned, with the Islamic Republic of Iran. But I believe that it is our role as democracies, and I'm going to say seasoned democracies, that were founded on these shared principles that cherish life and liberty, to remain morally clear, because it is the false moral equivalence that actually emboldens these entities, that emboldens the authoritarian regimes. And we would be really foolish not to zoom out and understand that the very same authoritarian regime that can attack Ukraine, i.e. Russia, is the same authoritarian regime that's inextricably bound up with Iran, with China, and so on and so on. That, what I'm describing to you, is a national security threat to Canada, to the United States, to Europe. That's not just about Israel. And at the end of the day, that is the differentiation that I think we have to make. It's very easy to get bound up and wound up in the politics of it. But this transcends politics. More than anything, for me, the existential nature and the urgency which you hear in my voice is because we are really on the brink of what I call a never again is now moment. And I can imagine that before World War II, there were the majority of silent or indifferent or lack of courage individuals that said it can never happen. It can't happen. And we don't have the privilege, if you will, to look away because we're on the front lines. But what I try to do every time I get on a plane, wherever it is that I'm going, is to try and make accessible the urgency and the existential nature of this moment to all of us who cherish humanity, life and liberty. And that's the moment that I think we're in. So, I hope that that's an answer.
Deborah, I know I'm going to ask you this question, then I'm going to ask Gustavo to chime in as well, and Michal, if you want to add anything. University campuses, because we've touched on that. In many ways, campuses are sort of become ground zero for anti-Semitism, and that you could argue that was the case before October 7th as well. There are reports that up to, it ranges, but a large number of non-Jews have negative views toward Israel and Jews, and there are surprisingly number of Jewish sort of Gen Z students who have negative views toward Israel too. Social media certainly plays a big role in that. How do we get out of this cycle? I know, Deborah, you spend a lot of time with university presidents and on campuses. Gustavo, you, I know for a fact, have spent time on our campuses here. How do we get out of this?
Well, I think that is a conversation that we have very vividly, very actively now with university presidents, with ministers of advanced education. I was just talking with your Minister of Advanced Education here in Manitoba earlier this evening about this. I think that we certainly have been talking to the presidents of the universities across Canada about making sure that the return to campus this September was calmer, was more supportive to our Jewish students and faculty, that it was trying at least to establish an environment where we have at the universities debate, civil discourse, argumentation, and so forth, pushing the envelope of knowledge, those kinds of things that we know universities need to be doing to expand our understanding of one another, to expand our understanding on so many different areas, but not to repeat what we've experienced this past year. I don't think we can afford another year of this kind of turmoil and chaos and hatred that we saw on our university campuses. So we've been working with the universities, with the university organizations across the country, and as I said, with a number of the presidents, on what they need to be doing. And they themselves have been having very intense conversations about it, as we know. So looking at their codes of conduct, what changes need to be made? What's happening with their EDI faculties on campus? Why have they not been as supportive to our Jewish students and Jewish faculty as we had expected? In fact, finding that EDI itself has been failing the Jewish community in not really expanding and being inclusive to the concerns of the Jewish community, whether we're talking about the university campuses or in the everyday workplace. Ensuring that our students have a much stronger sense that the university is there to make them feel part of the community, to make them feel safe, and to help them flourish in their university education. So looking at the security that's in place, but more importantly, ensuring that the students are getting the response that they need to concerns and complaints, which is one of the big issues we saw last year, that even concerns or complaints that they were taking to administration were not being seriously acknowledged. And this whole question about being uncomfortable or being unsafe, all of these issues that I think people were trying to grapple with, but not very successfully. So I think what we're seeing right now, and I've had some wonderful conversations here with your universities here in Winnipeg, I think we're seeing university administrations after the summer, in particular the encampments, really look very carefully at shifts that need to be made, both in their codes of conduct, in their policies, in EDI, in how they're supporting the students, in how they're working with the faculty associations to ensure that the kinds of conversations that are happening, yes, are strong and presenting lots of different viewpoints, but are not, in fact, dismissing or making people feel unsafe in their own university environment. I think there's a long way to go because we're also seeing issues related to the concept of, white settler colonialism, oppressed, oppressor, some of these new philosophies, political science theories that are going forward, which are healthy for debate, but maybe have been torqued to the point that we really need to rethink how we are, projecting the Canadian society through this lens. I think we've seen a lot of challenges on the university campuses that are probably right now the primary focus, not just for us, but as I said, for many of the administrations who I believe, and we've seen this since the beginning of September, are really trying to ensure that the year going forward is a much more constructive year for all of the students.
Gustavo, is there anything sort of that would apply for locally that you'd like to add?
I understand and echo everything Deborah said. Maybe in a more local perspective. Look, and I know you, Steve, have taken a lot of calls from concerned parents and families in our community, because our kids at university are being singled out, are being made uncomfortable because of their Jewish identity. That is just not cool. Everyone in this room needs to take part of solving this. We cannot have young people, fresh minds, that sign up for university, just like luckily, and university and campuses, I refer to both, luckily that their parents did as well, wanting to learn how to debate, formulate opinions, and challenge, only to find out that they need to be delegated to special spaces because it's easier to provide security and protection. That is a no-go. That's not the country that I immigrated to. That's not the country that your generations before you have forged for Canada. That's not Canada. And that's what's happening today. Today we had a leadership roundtable hosted by the Moral Institute for Justice and Peace. And we heard from the most senior leadership of the three organizations, University of Manitoba, University of Winnipeg, Red River College. We heard from students. To be around the table, to hear students to say that they are opting for online classes because it's safer and they don't have to show up and feel intimidated, not anymore. I mean, seriously, not anymore. We cannot have members of our community go to campuses with a map of Israel and having to get off the car, wondering if they're going to be hearing chants like from the river to the sea, because what that means is everyone in the state of Israel needs to be wiped out of the map. We have a homeland. Michal described that. That makes no sense. And the people that need to step up to combat this and to denounce it is not just the Jewish people or those that work at university. Let's be clear. We had to take on a lot of calls nationally, Steve, through the Center of Israel and Jewish Affairs, defining and explaining the role that the university presidents have to have, not just in Manitoba, across the country, around North America. The truth is, it's not an easy job. And as much as we in the Jewish community may not feel comfortable, may feel that that's not enough, let's understand that the complexity that the leadership at universities are facing are significant. But also, just because that's a difficult job, we shouldn't accept to have minority groups at a convocation to listen to a 10-minute speech, of which 2.5 are complete dissemination, spewing hate, singling out and misinforming, having Jewish families, like any other minority group that work hard to put their children through school, and for that to go viral on social media, for us to have to take it in the chin and actually have to accommodate to what is politically correct in Canada. Come on. That is not fair.
Michal, do you want to add anything to that?
Just add in a word. I think, and I've said this, I've met with tens of university presidents in North America and in Europe. I think that this is a moment of reckoning for university spaces, and that we have to consider very carefully, because if the mission of university is, as I went to law school, to teach people how to think, then we're okay. But if the mission of university has become to teach what to think, then we're in grave trouble. Meaning the advance of humanity depends on university spaces teaching critical thinking, encouraging not just diversity, physical diversity, but viewpoint diversity. If we are shutting down conversations and the ability to have certain opinions, and actually having to, and you asked about the Jewish students who will very often be in the, actually the forefront of the demonstrations against my lectures on campus, may sometimes be Jewish students who self-define as anti-Zionists. They have a right to self-define as anti-Zionists, but they do not have the right to preclude me from self-defining as a Zionist. And that understanding is something that universities have to contend with, because that is about academic freedom. If there is only one viewpoint that is allowed to be taught, and everybody else is either silent or silenced, isolated or leaves of their own volition, then that is something that is a challenge to university spaces for their mission statements and should concern us all. And in fact, the understanding, Deborah and I, and the global guidelines for combating anti-Semitism that just passed in Argentina with members of, or special envoys from 35 or 36 different countries committing to one of the global guidelines of the 12 steps is to educate. The understanding that education is the key. But if we educate what to think instead of how to think, then we are doing a disservice to everything that education is supposed to be about, and universities, of course, were at the forefront of that. I will say that it's not just universities anymore. I think that here in Canada, we have to be paying extra special attention because, I say this with sadness, as Canada has led at the forefront of the Israel Apartheid Weeks that I described before, it is now leading with public school boards that are actually systematically enabling this new strain of anti-Semitism to be taught. I'm sure some of you saw or witnessed the Ontario School Board taking, in Toronto, yes, the 7th and 8th grade field trip to, instead of going apple picking, which was what I did for my fall field trip, they went to a demonstration, a protest that was an anti-Israel protest, and in fact they dressed the children who self-identify as Zionists in blue shirts. That is something that I think we have to really be mindful of, and as I said before, and I believe deeply, education is the key to ensuring that we safeguard Canadian values, but it is also the danger with which, if we aren't mindful of it, definitely we lose the ability to ensure the continued teaching of how to think and not what to think.
Thank you. Well, I promised to keep the trains on time, so I'm going to ask one last question. I'm going to ask each of you to limit your response just to 2 minutes or so. We're all going to leave here tonight. I'm sure there'll be some very interesting conversations, dashboard discussions on the way home. But we're going to go to work tomorrow. We're going to go to the gym. We're going to go and live our lives. What is the one thing, and if someone takes someone else's answer, go to number 2. What can we do to stem the tide of anti-Semitism here in Winnipeg, in Manitoba? Deborah, why don't you kick it off? And I know we could go forever. Let's try to keep this to just a couple minutes each.
We focused on universities, and Michal then took us into the school system, K-12. I was also going to add the workplace in general, because we've seen in businesses an incredible rise in anti-Semitism that has been extremely difficult, again, for Jewish employees to live their work life the way they should. So I think what I guess I would leave everyone with, and this is what we talk about every day, and Gustavo and I talk about it a lot, we have to keep moving forward. This is not something that we pull back from. This is not something where we allow online courses so our kids aren't on the universities. We keep pushing forward in these various areas, whether we're talking about the universities, whether we're talking about Holocaust education right across this country, by September of next year, and how that is done in a way that's robust and really teaches the kids what that moment in time meant in terms of what we're seeing today, whether we're talking about the relationship with chiefs of police and law enforcement and special prosecutors on hate crimes and anti-Semitism. In the province of Ontario, there are 23 special prosecutors for car theft. There are no special prosecutors for hate crimes as it relates to anti-Semitism. It's one of the areas that we're working on. We need to be doing so much more with social media, but that could be a whole session in and of itself, and we are making some progress. I will tell you that I have heard that one of the problems in Canada is that we're not complaining enough about the hate speech that we're seeing on social media. So when you see it and you have a chance to issue a complaint, do it. Because we're hearing from some of the platforms that they're not getting the reaction they got. Hat off to Meta, who actually did identify Zionism as a surrogate word for Jew and Israel, and they are actually changing their policy in terms of anti-Zionist activity. So I'm just mentioning these different areas as an example. It's systemic. Hate has become systemic. It has been incorporated, sadly, into different parts of our social structure. This is going to be a long battle. I am not Jewish, but I took this job because of my affection for Israel and the Jewish community. And yes, I am absolutely a Zionist. And I know how important what we're doing is, because if we keep to it, if we keep to the hard work that has to get done, we will have a better Canada for my grandchildren and your grandchildren. And I apologize, as a non-Jew, to the Jewish Canadians that once again, the Jewish people are going to be the chosen people to help us through this dark period in Canada, where we deal with this existential moment, where we actually say, no, this is not the Canada. This is not how we treat our Jewish Canadian families. This is not how we treat one another. This moment, 2023, 2024, has exposed to us that we have some work to do. My message to all of us as we leave here tonight, keep doing the work.
Gustavo?
That was wonderful. When we leave here tonight, you'll see young people. You'll see people from Gray Academy and others from other Jewish families that go to other public schools. I need you to start thinking of them. I need you to think of your employees, your colleagues, the companies that you're part of, as you put it, and I do need to go to the gym. Everywhere we go, somebody is hurting, not just in my community. So it's time to actually do our part collectively. Because we're discussing anti-Semitism, very specific things that you can help with. We love it, advocate it, and engage with the government on a partnership to ensure that after a long period of discussions with the provincial government, mandatory Holocaust education was actually implemented a few months ago. When we see our elected officials go to a U.S. Holocaust memorial, become sensitized, and recognize that openly from the Manitoba ledge, that makes a lot of sense. It encourages the community to feel that we're heard. A few years ago, we celebrated Jewish Heritage Month. We do that every May. And a couple of years ago, we reflected on the amazing contributions that Izzy Asper, members of the legal community and the medical community, and Sol Caney, and the Blanksteins have done. And all of a sudden, now we're actually looking at the families, the businesses, the organizations that they help fund. So approach, engage, and support those organizations. To conclude with a specific example, we developed materials, training materials in consultations with Deborah's office and the guideline that you're soon to release.
Mention that guideline.
And that is going to give us an opportunity to clearly disseminate that across the country, and it will be available for free in multiple languages, so that people, no matter their affiliation with the Jewish community, would understand that we need to fight anti-Semitism today. Understand that there are many other minorities. Here tonight, we have representatives of the Mahatma Gandhi Center. The Sikh in the Hindu community are not immune to anti-Semitism and hate. After the Jewish community, the 2+ LGBTQ and the Black community are also falling prey of hate. But it starts at work tomorrow, maybe even tonight, Steve. Let's engage in a conversation, reach out to the community, to our center. We have materials to provide, training and sensitivity. And the ones that deserve the most recognition today, I believe, are both government crown corporations that have already incorporated our training materials here in Winnipeg. Here in Winnipeg, you have intranet services with CIJA-produced documentation, and the same goes for law enforcement. I love the question.
Michal, the last word to you. Thank you, Gustavo.
Look, I'll be very brief, and I'll say the following. You know, the late Elie Wiesel taught us that the opposite of hate is not love, it's indifference. And I turn to every single person with whom I've engaged over the last 2 days in Winnipeg and everywhere else that I've been, and say that you are each and all boots on the ground. Each and every person has the ability and the responsibility to make a difference in whatever capacity, in school, at university, at the workplace. We've spoken about all the various places and spaces, but I deeply believe that there are so many very good people who very often opt out of engaging, or maybe prefer not to, in a non-adversarial way, call out what it is that you may hear, that you may see. And I implore with each and every individual, using the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition enables, and Deborah's office will be issuing a very important set of practical ways, a guidebook, if you will, that operationalizes the definition that maybe seems too theoretical. But familiarize yourself with it so that you can engage with what you see at school, at work, on the street, and don't look the other way. Remember that the opposite of hate is not love, it is indifference. And this is a moment in which none of us should be indifferent to. So thank you again for the opportunity to engage in this way. And the most important thing for me, for everyone here to know, is that I am available in any capacity to engage across any audiences that enable to transcend and reach across real or perceived differences of geography, of religion, of politics, of denomination, because I do believe that this is an existential moment, but each and every one of us can make a difference at this moment. Thanks.
Well, yes?
If you don't mind.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Because Gustavo and Michal did a mini advertisement for the handbook on the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I'm just going to add a little bit more to that advertisement and say that indifference often comes from a lack of knowledge and awareness. It's very important that we help Canadians understand how anti-Semitism presents itself today. The IHRA definition helps us do that. We have spent the last 10 months, part of my staff, preparing a handbook on the IHRA definition. It is now with our Prime Minister for his review. He is very committed to it, but I can assure you it's been 10 months of an Everest climb. We've consulted with over 150 people to get this handbook well understood and make sure that we are taking into account various opinions, various outlooks, philosophies, etc. It's critical that it come out. I will encourage you to watch us closely for the next month, because it must come out in the coming month. It will be used to do that education that we all spoke about earlier, and to combat that indifference, and to help more people understand. So I highlight it for you, because if it isn't out in a month's time, I'll be coming back here to get all of you to come to Ottawa with me. And
Thank you. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap up this evening simply by thanking our guests. Michal and Deborah, thank you for being here. My friend and colleague Gustavo, and I just want to say to Gustavo and to all of you, Gustavo has been working tirelessly on our behalf, and I think you heard tonight what he really brings to the table for our community. So Gustavo, I do want to thank you. And I also want to thank everyone for being here. I hope you found tonight educational and even inspiring. Again, I do want to thank especially our non-Jewish friends. You being here tonight, and not just tonight, at other events, and your support. We hear you. but most importantly, we need you. And so I really want to thank you for being here, and we look forward to helping your communities, continuing to help your communities, so we can all make this a better place. Thank you very much for being here.